Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever in the world you are. Zimbabwe is in a serious economic and political mess. I think that is one issue where very few would disagree. We really need to address this problem. And I welcome the debate and the passion shown by many Zimbabweans out there. And tonight I would like to discuss issues raised by Mukoma Thomas Mapfumo in one of his interviews with Neanda Radio. Just listen to this.
kuda kuita mbiri yepati yekuti hanzi Zanu PF chiororo muchiororo muchipinza nyika munzara ndokuorora vanhu ikoko muchipinza vanhu munzara ruzhinji rwevanhu ruri kuchema nzara mazuva ano vana havasi kuenda kuzvikoro zvingori manyamabire nerongo munyika muna chakanaka chiri kufamba iye zvino izvi Harare yakuita fanika old western town yekuti unosvika nehosi wosungirira panze wozopinda musaluni inyika vakovana seko ivo vari kumbosapota ava vanhu ava vari kufunga timbobvunzawo kuti vanhu vari kusapota vanhu ava vari kufunga here vari kusapota chiiko vari kusapota urombo pavakasvika vanhu ava vachibva kuhondo havana kusvika Smith aine mari yake yakanaka vakapiwa dura rese remari vakanzi iyi mari zvikati nhasi taiwana pano uyo.
Let's stop there for a minute. I think it is important that we understand this. It's not only Thomas Mapfumo, but many other Zimbabweans have advanced the same argument that the people who continue to support Zanu PF, they are not thinking. I beg to differ there. What we've got to accept is that Zimbabwe has never held free, fair, and credible elections. So then it becomes absurd to say people are supporting a party that rigs elections does not have the support. People of Zimbabwe, I believe that if there were elections, free, fair, and credible elections in Zimbabwe today, they would be so desperate to get rid of Zanu PF. They will not vote for Zanu PF. They will not even bother to look at who is it they are voting as an alternative. 2008 was an important watershed year. The people voted for the first time in Zimbabwe since Zimbabwe's independence. The 2008 was the nearest we ever got to free, fair, and credible elections because SADC had put pressure on Zanu PF to accept fundamental changes that literally switched off the Zanu PF vote-rigging machinery. And so that was the nearest we ever got. The March 2008 was the nearest we ever got to free, fair, and credible elections. And people voted for change. But before the results could be announced, Zanu PF realized that the party was going to lose. And Mnangagwa himself has boastfully said he stepped in and ordered ZEC to recount. And the recount, as we know, took the next 6 weeks. And of course, during that period, the votes were being changed. Tsvangirai 73% of the vote was whittled down to 47%, enough to force a runoff. And during the runoff, the party used wanton violence. It is absurd to stand around and say people voted for Zanu PF in 2008. They did not. But after the runoff, the wanton violence, Mugabe reportedly got 84% of the vote. Was that people voting for Zanu PF? Of course not. The most important thing about the 2008 is that even SADC and the AU accepted that Zimbabwean elections are not free, fair, and credible for the first time. And it was SADC who initiated the global political agreement of 2008. And that offered Zimbabwe the opportunity to implement the democratic reforms so that the blatant cheating and wanton violence would be a thing of the past. It is shocking that so many Zimbabweans, even today with the benefit of hindsight, have failed to appreciate that point. The GNU, the primary purpose of the GNU was to implement the democratic reforms. And after 5 years of the GNU, not even one meaningful democratic change had been implemented. In other words, elections thereafter were just a repeat of the 2008. And it is therefore meaningless to accuse ordinary people of saying, oh, what kind of people are voting for Zanu PF? Zanu PF has been rigging elections. We had the golden opportunity to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections in 2008 to 2013 during the GNU. And that opportunity was wasted. That is a message that has got to go through, and people should learn to understand that. Because if you don't understand that, the discussion that follows is totally meaningless. Totally meaningless. You will not understand, you will not appreciate that MDC leaders sold out during the GNU. You will not appreciate that their participating now is actually a continuation of that sellout. Since the GNU, MDC leaders had absolutely given up hope of implementing the reforms. And they've been participating in elections which they knew were flawed and illegal, and that their participation will only help to give Zanu PF legitimacy. They continued to do it for the same reason that they failed to implement the democratic reforms during the GNU, i.e. greed and breathtaking incompetence. That point has got to be understood. To keep on blaming Zimbabweans for continuing to vote for Zanu PF, to me, shows that somebody here does not understand what has been going on here. And blaming the ordinary person in the rural areas who's frog marched to go and vote for Zanu PF is the most ridiculous accusation anyone can make. Those people are being coerced. And we should be the ones saying that is not right. If you have lived in the rural areas, like some of us have, I grew up in the rural areas. The amount of coercion that you get in the rural areas. It's unbelievable. These Zanu PF thugs will come to your home and say, we are having a Zanu PF rally at the Growth Point tomorrow. You're invited. Yes, they may say you're invited, but it is, everybody knows that if you don't go, you are in serious trouble, because that will then give them the excuse of labeling you a supporter of the opposition. And being accused of supporting the opposition in the rural areas is one of the worst crimes that an individual can commit. Particularly when you look at a situation where Zanu PF has all but bought the traditional leaders, from the headmen to the chiefs. If they don't like you in the village, they will harass you. The headman can even ask you to leave the village. Where are you going to go? Starting from scratch. All because you supported the opposition. After the 2008 runoff, many people who supported the opposition were punished. Over 500 people were murdered in cold blood. That is the level of intimidation that Zanu PF is capable of in the rural areas. And so to turn around and say, these people, why are you supporting Zanu PF? I think it's the most irresponsible statement anyone out there can make. The people in the rural areas have no choice. And those who keep on participating in elections, particularly when they had the option of implementing democratic reform so that these things will be a thing of the past, they turn around and accuse people of supporting Zanu PF. It's the most irresponsible thing that anyone can say. These MDC-CCC leaders owe the nation an apology. Owe the rural people particularly an apology. Let's listen a bit more to what Mukanya was saying, because I think some of the things that he raised are important, that we should discuss them.
atora akaisa muhomwe yakadai nhasi yapera iye zvino maakumhanya kunokureta kunana China chibatswa muchitengesa nyika. Vanhu vatraya kuintimidata vanhu. Tarisai muone zvakaitika paya pari kunzi akakundwa nachamisa uyu. Vanhu vakabuda vakaenda mustreet. Pakaitwa strategy yekuti mukaenda uko kwatakutumai masoja emimi mukanouraya 6 chete havadzoke mustreet ava. Vakazodzoka pakashutirwa vana freedom ine masacrifices, kunofiwa kana tichida kuti tisununguke, kunofiwa. Freedom ine masacrifices.
That is an interesting point. And I think many people have taken that argument to heart, that they should participate in these elections, and if the results do not come their way, they should go on the street and protest. It is important to understand that the right to free, fair, and credible elections is a right. It's not a privilege, it's a right. And that is the right that we should be defending. What MDC has done by failing to implement the reforms, even when they had the opportunity to do so, was to turn around and say, well, we can still win elections, even if the elections are not free, fair, and credible. And they've since sold that idea because most of their supporters even believe the triple C MDC claims that they've got strategies to win rigged elections. In other words, they have accepted that Zanu PF will rig the elections, and they have come up with strategies of how to win rigged elections. People must understand that the essence of that decision, the consequences of that decision, is that you have accepted to give up your right to free, fair, and credible elections. It's now a privilege. It is now Zanu PF that has got the right to rig the elections. And if you come up with the argument that you have got strategies to win rigged elections, you have per se given up your claim to having the right to free, fair, and credible elections. You have forfeited that right. Now, we go into the elections and you lose. You should not come back and claim that the elections, or complain that the elections were rigged. You knew that that was happening. And you decided that you had strategies to win rigged elections. And if your strategies fail, don't expect the world to sympathize with you. Because the warning and the advice has been all along, you should go for your rights. You should make sure the elections are free, fair, and credible. SADC are the ones who proposed the global political agreement 2008. And the primary, I repeat, the primary purpose of that GNU was to implement the democratic reforms so that elections are free, fair, and credible. MDC are the ones who failed to implement the reforms because they were confident they could win the elections without reforms. They are the ones who forfeited our right to free and fair elections. It is laughable that the same leaders are now expecting, if they fail to win rigged elections, they expect to end the Zanu PF regime, have regime change, by encouraging supporters to go on the street and protest. Thomas Mapfumo is saying, yes, there is a price for freedom. This is not the kind of battle we should be fighting. You give the regime legitimacy by participating in flawed elections, even when you have been warned they are flawed. And then you turn around and say, oh, okay, we are going to stage street protests to try to remove the regime. Street protests are never meant to achieve regime change. Not even in the democratic nations that have, where that right is recognized. That is never meant to achieve regime change. In Zimbabwe, we expect street protests to bring about regime change. We expect people to risk their lives to join in the street protests to bring about regime change. That is the most chaotic way of doing things. Why don't you go for the democratic route? Why don't you demand reforms to be implemented? And in this particular case, the very people who are encouraging people to go on the street are the ones who fail to implement the reforms. People of Zimbabwe should go back to MDC and triple C leaders and ask them, why did you fail to implement even one meaningful reform? Why? To keep on pretending that MDC leaders did absolutely nothing wrong is the most ridiculous position we can take. Because it only emphasizes, to SADC in particular, that we, the ordinary people of Zimbabwe, we don't know what we want. Even if democracy was handed to us on a silver platter, we will lose it. If it's given in the morning, by lunchtime, we've lost it. Because we don't know what democracy is. We hold our leaders on such pedestals that they are infallible. The worst thing we can do right now in 2023 is follow C blindly. Zimbabweans should not be participating in these flawed elections, because by participating, we're only giving SADC the excuse to grant Zanu PF legitimacy. What we should be saying loudly and very clearly is that the election process is flawed. We don't even have something as basic as a verified voters roll. Zanu PF has got so much money to bankroll its vote rigging machinery from the looting that it has been doing. The opposition has no chance of winning these elections. This process is not free, fair, and credible. The question keeps coming back. Why are you participating then if you know the process is not credible? You can't keep on participating and then at the end of the day think that you can bring about regime change by joining the street protests. We have got 2 points to make in these 2023 elections. Number one, that the process is flawed and the evidence is overwhelming. 2018, Mnangagwa rigged those elections. Organizations like the European Union produced a list of 23 recommendations, reforms which they recommended should be implemented to make sure that the next elections are free, fair, and credible. Not even one of those recommendations have been implemented. Not one. We can see for ourselves the evidence that Zanu PF is rigging these elections. Look at the violence. Look at the failure to produce a verified voters roll. How can anyone grant Zanu PF legitimacy when the process is blatantly flawed? Number two, we are not going to accept, and we should not accept, the argument that if the process is flawed, why is the opposition participating? Because we know the answer why the opposition is participating. They are the same reasons why the opposition failed to implement the democratic reforms when they had the golden opportunity to do so, i.e., greed and breathtaking incompetence. And so Zanu PF cannot be granted political legitimacy from a flawed process and with the participation of a discredited opposition. That is the argument we should make. I think encouraging people to go on the street the day after the elections results are out is irresponsible. because that will achieve nothing. Even if, for the sake of argument, Zanu PF was to be forced out, who will be coming in? Nelson Chamisa. Nelson Chamisa is not going to implement any reforms. If he and his friends fail to implement meaningful reforms during the GNU, what hope is there that they will implement reforms when they are in power? None. In fact, if anything at all, Nelson Chamisa has been promising, in fact, even during the GNU itself, MDC, Morgan Tsvangirai strategy was to woo the police, the army, the CIO, promising them that if he was to become president, they will keep all their benefits and their jobs. And the benefits is code name for their looted wealth and their opportunities to loot. In other words, they will now be working for him, for MDC and not Zanu PF. But otherwise, nothing has changed. Zimbabwe's economic recovery would need democratic reforms so that elections are free, fair, and credible, so that we can elect leaders who will be democratically accountable to the people. That is fundamental. To replace Chamisa, to replace Mnangagwa with Chamisa, and the system continues, it's not going to change anything. Just as replacing Mugabe with Mnangagwa did not change anything. Everybody could see nothing had changed there. It's just a new management. It's the same dictatorship under new management, that's all. These elections, it doesn't matter what the results are going to be. They are already meaningless. If the system, if we do not appreciate that there need to be free, fair, and credible elections, the world can see this is a country that is still stuck. Until we're figured out how do we have free, fair, and credible elections, we are going to continue having this cycle of rigged elections. And that is spelling chaos. This is a country that is as chaotic as ever. No investor, local or foreign, would want to invest in a country where there is chaos. There's no law and order. The failure to hold free and fair elections and to claim that we've got strategies of winning rigged elections is in itself accepting that there is no rule of law. Why would you want rigged elections when you can have free, fair, and credible elections? Unless you do not respect rule of law yourself. And that is exactly what we have got here. I applaud people like Thomas Mapfumo because I think he is one of the few Zimbabweans we have consistently looked at what is good for the ordinary people. And I am sure this interview, he gave it with all the best of intentions. His heart is in the right place. But I think what we need is an open and serious debate, because the route to hell is paved with good intentions. It's not enough to have good intentions. We have got to get the facts right. We have had rigged elections for the past, since independence, in fact. And we need to deal with that problem to move on. We can't keep on going back and forth on the same issue. We need to move on. We need to admit that the system we have, the political system we have in Zimbabwe, is broken. And the only way to fix it is to implement the democratic reforms. And it is totally irresponsible to keep on participating in a process that you know is flawed. Completely unacceptable. It's an outrage. We need to implement reforms. The last thing we want is to participate in 2023 elections. And then the morning after the elections, have another street protest in which the regime will only unleash its soldiers to kill people. We should not give the regime legitimacy and then try to remove it by street protests. That is irrational. Why did you give the regime legitimacy in the first place? What were you hoping to gain? To win rigged elections? Well, if that's why you're participating in these elections, thinking that you can win rigged elections, when you fail, you've got to accept the consequences. And the consequences is another 5 years of this corrupt and tyrannical Zanu PF dictatorship. Zimbabwe is already the most miserable country in the world. 43 years of corrupt and gross mismanagement, rampant corruption, and tyrannical rule has reduced the country into a pariah state, a failed state that cannot even provide even the most basic needs for its country. Zimbabwe is now the example. The world, if they are looking for an example of a failed state, most people out there will name Zimbabwe because of the level of corruption, the level of chaos. And now we are heading for another mother of chaotic elections. We know Zanu PF is rigging these elections, and yet you're being told we must participate. Participate in a process that is so flawed that you cannot change the result. All you are doing by participating is give the regime legitimacy. That is the most irrational argument I've ever heard. And to argue that at the end of the day, we must try to remove the regime by staging street protests, even if people get killed, is again just pure madness. If you can change the process in a peaceful way, and we did have the chance to change the regime in a peaceful way during the GNU, why didn't we change it? We still have a chance now by coming out right now and denouncing this process now, not wait until the day after the elections. No, denounce it now. Don't participate in it. And I really find it ridiculous that anyone could accuse, particularly the rural voters, of supporting Zanu PF. Those people have no choice. I speak to my rural relatives in the rural areas, and they tell me the level of intimidation that Zanu PF operatives are exerting on them. I have lived in the rural areas myself. I've experienced it firsthand. And I would never accuse them of voting for Zanu PF. Under the same conditions, I will find myself voting for Zanu PF too. What we need is a meaningful address of this problem of rigged elections. Admit it to ourselves. I'm finding it ridiculous that even now, 45 years after independence, 43 years of rigged elections, some people are still failing to understand what free, fair, and credible elections are. In this day and age, that's ridiculous. Chamisa is not participating in these elections with any hope of winning them. He's participating for the sake of the few gravy train seats that he knows Zanu PF is giving away, because Zanu PF needs the opposition to participate to give the regime political legitimacy. Ever since 2008, Zanu PF realized that the days of the de facto one-party state were over. Zanu PF embraced multi-party democracy, but with qualifications. The party realized that it must keep its carte blanche powers to rig elections and keep an opposition that the party is able to manipulate and coerce and do whatever it likes. But at the same time, keeping a fine balance of it keeps its powers to rig the elections, and at the same time pretends that this is a credible opposition. There is absolutely no reason why CCC failed to implement the democratic reforms during the GNU, other than that they were bribed by Robert Mugabe, given the ministerial limousines, the generous salaries and allowances, and for Morgan Trangirai, the $4 million Highlands mansion and so forth. And they forgot all about reforms. That is something that many Zimbabweans out there must first accept, because if you don't accept that, you will not accept what follows after that. And for you to fail to understand that fundamental political reality, even now, with the benefit of hindsight, is unforgivable. We cannot keep on going round and round in circles. We need to make progress. We need to admit what went wrong in the past to start discussing solutions for the future. To deny that the GNU was a wasted opportunity is to fail to understand what the GNU was all about. Is to fail to understand what democratic change is all about. MDC leaders were elected on the ticket to implement democratic change, as the party name implied, Movement for Democratic Change. After 23 years, you've got to ask yourself, what democratic changes have they brought about in the country? The answer is none. Not even one. They had the golden opportunity to do so during the GNU, and they still failed to implement even one meaningful democratic change. If you fail to understand that, then of course you continue to hero worship MDC / Triple C and think that they are the saviors of the nation. How can somebody who blatantly sold out during the GNU be the savior? We need to wake up. Zimbabwe is already a laughing stock, and we cannot allow this to carry on. This madness has got to be stopped. We cannot allow this madness to continue. Zanu PF is rigging these elections. Triple C are participating in these elections, knowing fully well that the elections are flawed and Zanu PF is rigging them, and that by participating, they're giving Zanu PF legitimacy. They're doing it out of greed. We need to wake up to that reality. We need to appreciate that reality. We should not participate in the elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy, to perpetuate the dictatorship. That is ridiculous. How can anyone argue somebody to do that? It's absolutely insane. And those who do participate, you are giving Zanu PF legitimacy. To then argue that at the end of the day, you can remove Zanu PF by staging street protests. It's unbelievable. Simply unbelievable. How somebody could argue in a circle like that. Why did you give Zanu PF legitimacy in the first place? At least participating, Zanu PF cannot force you to participate. At least those of us who are not in the rural areas where you are coerced. And those are the ones who should be denouncing this process. And yet, those are the ones who are supporting Triple C in this madness, who are supporting this, who are accepting this nonsensical argument that Triple C has got strategies to win rigged elections. The most important task for Zimbabwe today is to make sure that Zanu PF does not get political legitimacy out of this flawed electoral process, because out of the support of the participation of a totally discredited opposition. Yes, I repeat, Triple C, MDC are totally discredited. They sold out during the GNU. They are participating in these elections out of greed. That is a historic fact. And I think we need to accept that. We need to make sure that the world out there knows that we at least appreciate what went wrong during the GNU, and not bury our heads in the sand and pretend nothing wrong. MDC did nothing wrong during the GNU. This fight to make sure that Zanu PF does not get political legitimacy is the fight of our generation. This is the fight that people must commit themselves to. If Zanu PF gets legitimacy at the end of the 2023 elections, then we are looking at another 5 years of this chaos, corruption, mismanagement, and we will only sink even deeper. We are already the most miserable country. And by the way, on that scale, we were the most miserable country for the last 3 years. So if we vote for Zanu PF, I think we can confidently say we'll probably continue to be the most miserable country for the next 5 years too. Because I don't see anything changing here. I don't see anything changing here. Even if Zanu PF does not win these elections, Chamisa is not going to change anything. Chamisa, all he wants to do is to get into power and have his chance to loot. If he was going to implement any reforms, why didn't he do so during the GNU when they called an opportunity to do so? He has already assured those who are behind the Zanu PF rigging machinery that their positions and their pegs will not be touched if he became president. And there's nothing that pleases those people more. Because if he was to win, they will sure as hell make sure that he honors that word. And I think he will honor that word. If he could not implement reforms when he had the golden chance to do so, under no coercion, what more when somebody is holding the gun to his head? All he wants is a chance to loot. I think Zimbabwe deserves better. And I think we need to have a serious debate on these issues to move the country forward. And I'm surprised that people are still failing to understand what happened during the GNU. There's sufficient information out there to spell out all doubt what happened during the GNU. Why are we still talking as if the GNU MDC did nothing wrong? They sold out. That is a fact. I think we need to accept it and move on. I'll leave it at that. And I hope that Zimbabweans out there will seriously look into this matter. We cannot afford another 5 years of Zanu PF tyrannical rule. That is the #1 message I would like to leave with you all. Thank you and good night.